Hello lovely people! Today I'm going to be finally talking about my favourite fiction books that I read in 2021. I had hoped to do this a lot sooner in the year, but I didn't, so now it's now, and we're just going to go forward with it.
Sophie Vlogs!
I tried to round this to like a nice round number. That's not happened. I've had to be brutal, and even then I still feel like I have too many books. So we're just going to crack on with it and just dive in. I'm going to start off with The Grass Dancer by Susan Power. Susan Power is a member of the Standing Rock tribe. This follows, well, the way that the blurb describes, it says that it follows this love story between Ghost Horse and Red Dress that then like reverberates through the ages. So I think I expected it to start off at that furthermost point and work our way forwards, but actually this starts off at the most contemporary point and it works its way backwards. And you get to follow essentially generations of people from this one tribe, and you get to see repercussions of actions and stuff like this, but you get to see it all in reverse. And I found that really fascinating because, yes, this all stems from these actions that happened between this couple in the 1800s, but you don't really get to understand the full ramifications until you peel all the layers away, and then you get to that point. So you get to see, characters. You start off from one person's perspective, and they have all of these understandings about their relationship with, like, their mother, for example, and they think that their mother doesn't speak because of X reason, and then you go through a couple of narratives, and then you realise that they've got the complete wrong end of the stick, and it's a completely different reason. And I think what I found really powerful about this is that everyone in this is very nuanced. Even the figure who would potentially fill that like antagonistic role, she's still so nuanced and she has such depth to her, and you really understand. If you cannot excuse everyone's actions, you understand everyone's actions. You understand that maybe X person is acting in this way because they don't have the full information, but the reason they don't have the full information is because of Y, and you get to just see all of these strands and how they interrelate, and I just thought it was beautifully written. I thought it was really masterfully plotted, and I just found it absolutely gorgeous. So that's my first favourite of last year. This is in no particular order, I'm just picking up them as they are in my pile. So next I want to talk about The Root of Ice and Salt by Jose Luis Zarate, translated by David Bowles. This is a Mexican writer. This is the first time this has been translating into English. I'm aware of this because of Silvia Moreno Garcia. It's her press that translated and published this. It is a queer gothic retelling of the portion of Dracula where Dracula comes from Transylvania to Whitby by boat. So we follow the captain of that ship, and it's very, very small, but it's haunting. It has such atmosphere. Because you will either read this if you have read Dracula with the awareness of how it will end, or if you haven't read Dracula, even if you don't have that knowledge, I still think the way that it builds suspense and dread as it goes on is just really powerful. The captain already is existing in this state of heightened emotion because he's a queer man and he has a lot of desires towards the people on the ship that he is trying to clamp down upon. So he is a very repressed person, and he's already having all of these vivid dreams and that kind of thing, which then, with the presence of what we know to be Dracula on this ship, that then has who is able to manipulate dreams, and this creeping sense that you are on a closed ship in the middle of the ocean, and yet somehow someone is picking people off one by one. Will you be next? Will you survive? All of this like dread, suspense, horror that is to do with this vampire genre, mixed with this absolute heightened state of longing and suffused desires and the physicality of desire. It's just a very atmospheric read. I found it very powerful. I really liked, I won't spoil anything, but the ending, the way that our captain kind of embraces what is happening and that kind of thing. I really, really enjoyed it. I've been really enjoying Dracula retellings, reimaginings, things that are in conversation with it. And I thought that this one was really fantastic. So I really loved this. Then there is Lud-In-The-Mist by Hope Mirlees. This is a piece of fantasy from the 1920s. It has a Neil Gaiman quote on the front, and I can definitely see how this is in some ways like a lot of inspiration for what the town of Wall was in Stardust, because Lud-In-The-Mist is this little country town, and it exists sort of like at the intersection of where the Fae world meets the human world. And so there's all these ideas of like propriety and how like trying to police the Fae world and trying to stop it from overlapping in ways that are not approved of, which, are not always successful. We follow Nathaniel Chanticleer. His daughter disappears. There's like all of these little threads whereby the structured way that this human town functions, Fae is overlapping into it and spilling over and that kind of thing. And I feel like there's a real message at the heart of this, really, where like they need to find a balance. It's this place that for so long has tried to like keep everything separate and divided, and then that's having all these mass repercussions. I just think that this is a really classic, it's drawing a lot of very like classic ideas of Fae and like tricksters, but also like how does the Fae world work and that kind of thing. And I think it's kind of that interesting mix of like societal manners coming up against untamed wildness. I don't know, I wasn't quite sure what to expect going into it, and I actually just found myself really taken with it, and I really, really liked it. A book that I think goes well with Lud-In-The-Mist is one that I read on I have a physical copy of it, but I've lent it out so I can't show it to you, but that's Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho, because this is another book that is to do with Fae, but also a society. So it's set in Regency England. We follow Zacharias, who is the first black sorcerer royal, and as a result he is coming up against like a lot of like discrimination and that kind of thing. Something has happened to England's magic, and magic is not flowing as it should, and as Sorcerer Royal he needs to investigate why that is. He ends up meeting this woman, I think her name is Petronella, could be Petunia, definitely begins with a P, and she is a lower class woman who has magical affinity, and they essentially team up and they're looking at what's happened and how can they fix it. The reason I really liked this one is this was my first Zen Cho, and I've been going on a bit of a Zen Cho reading blast because I've been really enjoying her work. But what I really liked about this is it kind of had all of those aspects of like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell that were to do with a Regency society and how magic would tie into that. This takes a real look at how like Zacharias' race plays into this, how Petronella's class plays into this, how ideas of gender play into it, because it's very much a class and gender divide between which women are allowed to engage with magic and which women aren't. There's a conflict thread to do with the British Empire's presence in this conflict that is elsewhere in the world, and it has all those things that I like from like Fae, like Fae exists in this, magic exists in this, but also we have this society that is based around, like Regency manners and that kind of thing, and it's like this very great intermingling of all those things with actually like a real critical look at some of these other topics that don't always get explored in narratives like this. So really, really liked that one. After that is Under the Udala Trees by Chinelo Okparanta. This is set during, this begins in the 1960s during the Nigerian Civil War, but we follow this girl called Ijeoma throughout her life. Essentially, the Nigerian Civil War has a big impact on her family. Her father dies as a result of this. Her mother sends her off to go stay with these people. While she's there, she falls in love with this other girl. Not only is it disapproved of because they are both girls, but also because their peoples were on opposite sides during the war. There's this extra element that is not just dealing with homophobia, but there's also this idea that they've transgressed because they've crossed these other boundaries as well. And then we kind of just follow Ijeoma throughout her life, but we go back and forwards between her as an older woman, like reflecting on some of these things. We get to see what it is like to exist in Nigeria as a queer person. Definitely, like, this doesn't shy away from showing you how brutal some experiences can be, that kind of thing. It's, I thought it was really beautifully written. I feel like Ichioma, one of the interesting parts of this is her relationship with her mother, who is a figure that deeply wants to change her, but also wants to protect her, and they have, their relationship is complex, and the time is given to explore that complexity in a way that I found very compelling. Definitely one that is occasionally a bit of a hard read, but I really, I don't want to say enjoyed it, but I really thought it was well done. To move on to a bit of fantasy, this is Amberlough by Lara, Elena, Donnelly. I say fantasy, this is kind of like an alternate Weimar era Berlin. So we're kind of like parallel looking at essentially the rise of the Nazi Party in Weimar era Berlin, but instead we're in this fictional world. We follow three different people. So we follow Cyril, who is like a spy for the government. We follow Ari, he's like a cabaret performer and smuggler, and then we follow Cordelia, who is a cabaret performer, but she ends up getting embroiled in some things. What I like about this, and also the second book that I have read, but I haven't read the third book yet, is she's very focused on showing you not the parts of the history that you would necessarily think. Like, this is really showing you how this regime could come into power, who needs to be compromised, who sacrifices morals, who finds themselves doing things that they know are reprehensible, but they feel like they have no other choice. Like, how does this regime come to power despite the fact that everyone is saying that, oh, it won't actually happen, and all that kind of thing. So we're in this, it's very, very queer, it's this, I really enjoyed the world building and this sense, like, this idea of, like, Weimar-inspired time with all these cabarets and this, like, criminal underworld and that kind of thing. That was really interesting to read about. But then to briefly also touch on the next book jumps forward in time, and we pick up from a point that again feels slightly like we've missed the big action, and we are once again looking at a liminal space within this thing. In that case, that space is like the building of a resistance. How do you go about doing that? So she never focuses the lens wholly on like what you would consider like the blockbuster film version would be. It's always looking at it from like an angle and from like behind the curtain. What are the strings? How do they get pulled to then have this situation happen? So yeah, I need to read the third book because I thoroughly enjoy this series, but this has definitely been a highlight of 2021. A book that I read on my Kindle is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevado. This tells the story of two half-sisters who don't know about each other until their father dies in this plane crash. It's told in verse, and it flips between each sister's perspective. And I found this approach to looking at grief extremely interesting because, you know, they're both grieving the loss of their father, who they loved very much, whilst also having to process the fact that their father is not the person that they thought he was, and that, you know, he had two families, one of which lives in America, one of which lives in Puerto Rico, and their experiences have been very different as a result of where they live. Their experiences of their father has been very different based on when he is able to spend time with them. And so you get this messy look at grief that I found very compelling to read about. And you also get this look at, like, how do you navigate suddenly discovering that you have a sister that you never knew existed, because that's not necessarily an easy thing, because they both come in with feelings of how the other person got to experience the father in a way that they didn't, and that kind of thing. I have been really enjoying Elizabeth Acevedo. I think With the Fire on High was one of my, I think I put that in one of my favourite fiction books of 2020. So definitely need to read more Elizabeth Acevedo again this year. Maybe she'll pop up in 2022, so we'll see. Another one that was sort of like a complex look at like a messy person was Mr. Loverman by Bernadine Evaristo. This follows Barrington Jedediah Walker. He's a 74-year-old Antiguan-born man who is living in the UK, and he has been married to his wife for like 60 years, but he's been in love with his best friend the whole time, and essentially we've come to this point in Barry's life where he is having to make the decision about what he does with his life. Does he come out to his family? Does he decide to spend his remaining time with the man that he loves? Does he continue the facade of existing with his wife and all that kind of thing? And well, I understand people who read this and who don't really like it, because Barry is a person who has a lot of prejudices. He can be misogynistic. He definitely always thinks that his way of thinking is right. But one of the things that this book is exploring is Barry having to realise that sometimes when he thought that he was acting in the best way possible for his family, actually he was causing a lot of pain, and that there were other ways he could have gone about things. So he really goes through a process in this of having to be challenged, but also a process of like, he might have all these ideas and that kind of thing, but actually he's also capable of deep kindness. And I just found this sort of like study of this man and this family and the ways that they've all hurt each other, and like, how do you go forward from there? How do you continue to build? Can you continue to build a family? Like, what's all that about? Also found it deeply affecting to read like this experience of this man who has never felt like he can be openly in a relationship with the man that he loves, having a taste of what that might be like, to be able to like hold the man he loves' hand in public, that kind of thing. So this is my second Bernadine Evaristo. Girl, Woman, Other was definitely in my top books of 2020. This is another one where I need to read more, and she's probably going to pop up again in more best book roundups in the future. I'm going to do a little run of middle grade, because I feel like I have a handful that I should talk about. First up is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This beautiful Folio Society edition was brought to me by my friend Mark for my birthday. Thank you, Mark, you absolute star. I loved this so much. I have seen the Ghibli film before, and I really, really liked it, but I knew going in that this is a different entity, and I think that really helped, because I kind of just went in to see what this was like, rather than expecting to have the Ghibli film, but just like bulked out a bit more, because the characters are different, the events are different, there are like notable plot differences and that kind of thing. I think I just really loved the experience of this. I think that Diana Wynne Jones creates like this really wonderful magical little world. One of my favourite things was seeing how like Howl he's just a guy from Wales. Like when they go through the door to go to his like where he's originally from, you realise that he's just like this guy from a little Welsh village who like used to play rugby with his friends and then somehow found out the information to be able to come into this world and be a magician, like a wizard. Like, that's something that I'm like really enjoyed the process of discovering, and I think this has a lot of moments like that where it's like, if you just go into it not expecting it to be the film but just to see what it's like, she's got all of these like little details that I just found delightful. I find the relationship between Sophie and Howl really fun, this sort of like push and pull they have. I think it was magical. I would be really interested to hear, if you have read the rest of the series, what it is like, because I know that it's not like sequels, but they continue to be characters in other books. I don't know. Please do let me know your thoughts, because I don't know whether to continue with it or not. My other middle grade is A Kind of Spark by Elle McNicoll, which we follow Addie, who she's autistic. She lives in this little Scottish village, and during one of her lessons she learns about the witch trials, and she learns about the women who were persecuted in the place where she lives, and she wants to put up a plaque or something to commemorate it, but she finds herself dealing with a lot of pushback from the village, who don't want to face up to this history that they have. And then that also intersects with her experience of being autistic. She also gets a lot of pushback. She sees a lot of herself in these women who are misunderstood and misrepresented, and who no one wants to really face up to their treatment of. I just thought that this was like beautifully, masterfully written middle grade at its finest, where I'm so glad that kids get to read this. I'm so glad that neurodivergent kids get to read this. But also I think this is a book that a lot of adults also benefit from reading. And Elle McNicoll this got a lot of buzz when it came out, and I think it's really deserved, and she's another author that I really need to go off and explore further. Moving up to like a little bit of YA, I also really liked Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating by Adiba Jaigirdar. I think I liked this more than the Henna Wars, actually, because I think I rooted for this relationship a bit more. Hani is like, she's like a popular girl, but when she comes out to her friends as bisexual, they don't believe her, And so she lies and she says that she's dating Ishu. Ishu decides to go along with this because Ishu wants to prove to her parents that she's a well-achieving, responsible girl. So she wants to be head girl, but head girl is essentially a popularity contest. So they agree that they will fake date for a while, and they'll both achieve their aims, and then happy days. As you might expect, a romance ensues, but I enjoyed both girls' struggles, and I don't want that to sound bad. I just mean that I felt like they were very relatable, the issues that they were grappling with, and I felt like the way that they were portrayed and given time and that kind of thing was done really, really well. And you get to see that like some of these things are not things that they can fix immediately, but they get to claim themselves a bit more. Ishu doesn't have an issue with her own sexuality, but she's not necessarily ready to talk to her family about it, and that's fine. Stuff like that. I really understood how these two girls would connect and like the things that they had in common, but also like the reasons why some of this like miscommunication or like some of what causes them to be, the conflict within the relationship. I understood. Another YA book is Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko, which I also read on my Kindle. This is African-inspired fantasy, and we follow Terasai, who has been raised by her mother, and essentially like she's been raised for the purpose of becoming part of this prince's Council of 11. And the idea is that once you're part of the Council of 11, you're like bonded and you can't hurt the prince. But she's been raised with the aim of killing him, which is such an interesting setup standpoint. I just thought that this was such like a fantastically exciting piece of fantasy writing. I thought the world building was brilliant. I thought definitely there's a handful of characters from this like council that are focused on a lot more than others, for sure. So there were some of them which were a bit more, I don't really have a sense of them as much, but like our little core cast of characters I felt like I really got a strong sense of, and I just thought it was really fabulous. I really need to read Redemptor, the sequel, for sure. The next book is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This is a intergenerational, like, historical fiction. We are looking at this Korean family. So Sunja is, she enters a relationship with this man, and she gets pregnant by him, but he is already married. So instead, she marries this other guy. They move to Japan together, and we just follow, like, all of the generations of her family as it, like, unfolds. What I really loved about this is, it's called Pachinko, which are these little machines that are like gambling that can be fixed, but you don't know which machines are fixed and in what way they're fixed, so people still gamble on them. And I kind of felt like that really summed up like what this book is looking at. Like, we are essentially experiencing a lot of Korean and Japanese history. It's just we get to see kind of the randomness of fate. Sometimes these people are in exactly the right place at the right time, and other times they're in the wrong place. And it all feels in that way that life is, where it's like they managed to get through this horrible piece of history because they happened to be in this good place, but like this other family member like had this horrendous experience because they were over here. And just this like sweeping look at this family. You get to like different perspectives on the same life events. You get to see how like our woman experiences it, but then also like how maybe her child, when they find out some details, like how that affects them, like just this like interweaving of narratives. I just thought it was really lovely and gorgeous, and just a beautiful piece of historical fiction writing. After that, it's Spider-Woman's Granddaughters, edited and introduced by Paula Gunn Allen. This is a collection of traditional tales in contemporary writing by Native American women. I think that Paula Gunn Allen did a masterful job curating this. She does a really great job of introducing everything to give you, the reader, who, in my case, I didn't have a lot of context for a lot of these things, the exact key pieces of information that you know to get everything out of the pieces that you need. And she also arranges them in a really interesting way. So there's traditional tales in this, there are retellings in this, there's a mix of like fiction, occasionally non-fiction, and everything like interrelates to each other. So it's split into sections. There's the warriors, the casualties, and the resistance, and each section kind of explores that particular theme, And some of the narratives are drawing on the same traditional tale, but reworking it in different ways. Some of them are drawing on the same like figure who recurs in some of these story cycles, but again, drawing them in different ways. And I just felt like it was really well curated, so that not only were the pieces themselves beautiful, but the reading experience and the way that she walks you through the narrative to develop your understanding of this exploration of theme, just beautifully done. And ultimately, it's the final revival of Opal and Nev by Dawnie Walton, which I see compared to Daisy Jones and the Six a lot because it's like an oral history narrative style, but I think that they're very different texts. I really loved this because we're following Opal and Nev, who are they were this musical duo in like the 70s. Opal is a black woman, Nev is a white guy, and essentially like the person who is interviewing them and who is like spinning this tale for us is the child of this guy who was killed at one of their concerts. It starts off as this like oral history narrative where it's this woman who is interviewing the band members and trying to like, it all kind of feels like it's coming back to her father a bit, but also we are exploring like what it was like for Opal as a black woman to exist in this particular time, in this particular industry, that kind of thing. And then you kind of reach a point and like some crucial information is revealed, and then the narrative takes like a different spin and a different like angle, and I thought that that was so well done, and some of the conversations that were being had with that were like, are so pertinent, are so relevant. I just thought that this was absolutely doing that, let's like enjoy the vibe of the 70s and everything, but in a way that had such a critical lens and doesn't let you forget that this is not an idealized version of the 70s. You get to see all of the strife and how that affected this band and this woman and all of that kind of thing. The final book, I wasn't sure whether to categorize this as fiction, which is why I thought I would talk about it last. But this is A Godothin by Aneurin, and the reason I wasn't sure whether to categorize it as fiction is because it's kind of like the account of this battle that did happen. So it's kind of like it happened, but did it happen in this way? It's a poem that was composed in early Welsh about this conflict, and I really loved the reading experience of this. I talked about this one in my Deweython wrap-up, so I'll link that down below, and I'll link any other reviews where I've talked about these books in more detail, also down below. But I just, like, I read parts of this aloud. I wanted someone to, like, perform this for me, like it would have been performed at the time that it was composed. I was fascinated by the way that three recurred, whether that is you get, like, a trio of descriptions that all follow a similar pattern, or whether that's because you get a trio of people being compared to the same animal, or this is a trio of people who have this role in the battle, like how three came into play, also how the different animal metaphors came into play. It was really interesting to sort of see how this particular Celtic culture, like the associations with different animals and how that was weaved in, and I could feel what it would have been like to have heard this poem spoken and performed. And I just thought it was really great. So that's my final book. Those are all my favourite fiction books that I consumed in 2021. I had to be brutal. There's a whole bunch more that I could have talked about, but this video is too long already, so I will leave it there. I would love to know if you have read any of these. Please do let me know your thoughts on them. I would also really love to know what your highlights were. If I haven't read them, then maybe I can fit them in this year. That would be great. But yeah, please do leave a comment down below if you fancy it. Otherwise, I will see you next time for something different, and in the meantime, I hope you have a really, really lovely day.